Yes, yes.
Okay, wonderful. So I want to talk about the ideas that we have to find prescriptions for the challenges that we face, particularly as men and as a community. And so I've been working on this idea when I look at the landscape of understanding psychology, understanding mental health. Where does it come from? How is it defined? And more importantly, the way we define mental health comes from the idea of culture. So I want to be clear with that up front. Culture defines the way in which we function through the rules, through values, through rituals, behaviors, the way we relate to each other. Culture defines those things. Now, also make it very clear, and I hope that we all see that this connection of understanding culture, we are also able to recognize how culture defines the essence of a people. So the essence of a people. So with that said, when I begin to talk about the ideas and understanding of what is mental health, the idea is to come up with a prescription for it. So what do we know about this? Well, we do know in terms of my work and my experience in the field of psychology, that to talk about positive mental health is to talk about the establishment of how culture, the foundation of who we are as a people. And when we begin to talk about this foundation, we do recognize, so there's no doubt, I'm gonna make it plain and simple. We recognize that the Black church is different than the white church. By the way we ministry, by the way we relate, by the way we ordain, by the way we discuss the issues that are permeating within our community. There's a difference. So for me, that gives us the license to begin to say that as we talk about this from a perspective of us, we talk about the need to establish the understanding how spirit is part of everything that we do, and that out of this spirit, there's this connotation, this notion known as Ubuntu. In my positive mental health model, it comes from the understanding the philosophical foundation of Ubuntu. And the first key three terms, and I'm going to define Ubuntu as we move on, but the key terms that I'm not going to expound upon is this need to be connected with others, how we demonstrate a sense of competency amongst ourselves, and that there's a level of consciousness. Now, everything that was said, that was laid out in the previous presentation by my brother, was that he touched upon all three things. All things that we do, the way we relate, the way we connect, the way we have an understanding, the way we function, and the way we begin to demonstrate an awareness. Ubuntu, the term Ubuntu simply means the essence of being human. We have to recognize other people's humanity as it relates to our own humanity. So Ubuntu overall states that my humanity is based on the recognition of others' humanity and vice versa. It's reciprocal. So the human spirit is whole, it's well, and it's healthy when the soul of being in Ubuntu, the reality, is characterized by the interdependence, human relations. The discussion about the issues of depression is an isolated experience for an individual in their own minds and in their own heads. That's why when people get depressed, some of the characteristics is that they become isolated. You see, they disconnect themselves from being this notion of being connected. So it's clear that we have to come with prescriptions, right? So in my work, the power of psychology, African psychology, expresses the essence of our living, our being. It is used to capture the maps of meaning and growing out with the people's what? Cultural grounding, the historical relations, and the meaning as a person. This all to me is talking about this idea of epistemic reflection. Epistemic reflection, epistemology means how do I know what I know? And we know what we know through various experiences in life. Sometimes we know about things because our ancestors told us about things. That's why we dream. That's why we go off in space in Wonderland thinking. How do we know what we know? Some folks know a lot without being in a classroom. How do they know what they know? The paradigm of framework of talking about mental health within the Black community is to talk about it from an African Black psychological perspective. That is the idea of where we come from and recognizing who we are. And the skill set is that we have to begin to utilize certain processes, strategies to what? Engage and to inform our mental health functioning. So all aspects of this is important. And I'm gonna give us some prescriptions in the end, and hopefully you guys will follow through, and I will find a way to give, what I'm about to show you to the church, and that way everybody can have it because we can use a prescription. But let's begin to recognize, we need to understand, we have to what? We have to name the world, categorize, classify, and demarcate the world and behavior, not in conjunction with how the dominant society has done to us, but what we have done for ourselves. We have to create a liberation and humanitarian way of functioning. Very important. Define things for ourselves. Mental health includes our emotional, psychological, spiritual, and social experiences. Mental health includes our emotional, psychological, spiritual, and social experiences. The factors we talk about that contributes to mental health is our spirit and spiritness. See, spirit exists all around us. Spiritness is how you manifest that spirit. It's how you present that spirit. That's where people begin to recognize what is authentic within the connection with you and your authentication of recognizing your relationship with others. What is authentic? The spiritness and how that works and that functions. We also, as he was discussed earlier in the presentation just before me, the biological and the organic, and I had to throw this term in, called melanin, because that is what makes part of our system as an organism. An individual is an organism. Well, what's most pronounced within the Black community is that one of the greatest parts of our organism is this thing called melanin, which is embedded all throughout our bodies. Melanin, we know through research, has distinct responses to the environment. Melanin, we know through research, has experiences that directly relates to the effects of how drugs are manifest within our bodies. Melanin is a organic biological component of our existence, of our being. And we need to get a hold of understanding that in the field of psychology, particularly psychiatry, because we do find out that there are different medications that have different effects on people from different cultures. The sad part is the research has not been done on those of African descent ourselves. But we do recognize that research has been done showing that in the Asian population, certain medications you can't give them at the same rate because the Asians' biological system, organic system, is different than that of Europeans. We also recognize that life experiences such as family, community experiences have a way of affecting our mental health. And of course, our history. When we recognize the history, group history, ethnic history, all these things have an effect on how we see ourselves and how we relate to each other. So we have to be real about this when we begin to talk about the understanding of how is it that we function. So again, when we compare, when I've gone through the research and looked at my studies of psychology, European psychology talks about the ideal to be individuate ourselves from others. That's individualism, working in isolation, working alone. Well, that's funny because that is the same characteristic as when one is depressed, being in isolation, being alone. We also begin to recognize that So for us, connectedness is a major component of who we are. Competency. We talk about competency from self. And a lot of times folks have been challenged within the workplace, within schools, of the level of competency that you may demonstrate to others. And what they're evaluating you on is, what can you contribute? Well, there's also another level of competency for us. It's called social competency. How do we relate in social settings to other people? How do we connect with others? And then a sense of consciousness. European talks about personal consciousness. I'm here to talk about a collective consciousness as it relates to who we are and what we're about. So we begin to see consciousness is a level of awareness of self and others. Competency deals with skills, abilities to successfully function and maneuver through social demands. And connectedness is the feeling or a sense of belonging to others, culture, group, tribe, so forth. So we begin to see and recognize that cultural structure, deep level and surface level, informs and impacts our level of mental health. They have an impact on us. I'm gonna go through something real quick, then I'm gonna take us to a prescription of what we can do for ourselves. You know, I like to play with words all the time and get us to recognize, why do some people feel like they don't go to therapists? And it's a play with words, right? You walk into a therapy session and they begin to define you on other people's terms. And a good therapist will recognize this. So I say they begin to rate the idea of who you are. So you see that play. Look at this, is a European term. I didn't come up with this term. Therapist can be seen as the rapist. He violates your soul and your spirit unless he's a culturally competent therapist. Yeah. And he actually begin to what? Acknowledge who you are. We talk about a healthy self. The healthy self learns to what? Let's break that word down. I like to see it. A healthy self learns to heal thyself. So you learn strategies within the sessions, but you also learn how to heal yourself, try to become holistic. So I want to be clear about this. So the most important thing to define for ourselves is the meaning of our how to be human, health and wellness. This idea called Ubuntu. I am because you are. Philosophical foundation of how we are to be in the world. I am because you are. The European says in psychology, I think, therefore I am. Well, you know what? We do a lot of thinking in this world. But if our thoughts do not connect with others, then we become isolated, disconnected, not feeling whole and healthy. And understand, a lot of times folks get what? You get affirmation when others acknowledge you for who you are and what you're about. You can stand alone by yourself, I think, therefore I am, and sit in your own room and say you are great. But you don't get those affirmations from others, then you become isolated and you become lonely through this process. So we need to see and recognize how we do this. So let me jump to another. Let me provide prescriptions for us. The prescriptions that we need to deal with or engage in certain practices, I call them the Zola up process, which is the love. Zola means love, but it's not a simple love. It is a love of healing capacity. Now, let's be real as men. When you found that first person whom you said you really feel this connection with them, and you feel that there is something that's so strong, and you may call it love. For some reason, it was a healing love in the moment because it made you walk with a pep in your step. It made you sleep good at night. It made you wake up with a smile on your face. It made you feel like you can accomplish anything in the world. It had a healing capacity. It made you feel good about yourself. So we need to recognize how love serves as a healing capacity, a self-healing capacity. And we want to share that self-healing capacity with others. So Zola up, the term called Zola up. We Zola up on our families. We Zola up on each other. We Zola up on how we cherish our being, cherish our relationships, cherish our friendships, cherish the men who you connect to in life. We have to be real with each other. We have to check each other. We have to keep each other straight. We have to talk about these things in context. What does it relate? One of the first practices we should be able to engage in is that to remember. Remember. So there are 5, it's called a 5-star enhancement plan. The 5-star enhancement plan. We want to remember who we are and whose we are. You don't operate in this world by yourself. Most people who have severe mental health challenges are oftentimes pushed aside and left alone. We should remember that we are magnificent people, birthed through the womb of Mother Africa. So as men, we take a certain prominence or position in the world. We understand that no matter where we are those who have to be visionaries, valiant, peacemakers, power brokers, scholars, scientists, and so forth. In other words, you have a skill that you have to contribute and pass on to the world. So we want to think about and discuss the many forms of how we Zola, we love and express in our daily lives and strengthen that inspires us. The next, step 2, we want to what? Remind ourselves. Even though many of us wish it was not so, there is this thing called white supremacy that has an impact on our culture, on our communities, on our education, and even on the way we practice. We have to acknowledge those things. And when it comes to people of color, regardless of socioeconomic status, we live in a toxic and hostile environment. We live in a toxic and hostile environment. How do we counteract those things? We have to remind ourselves that during the Ebola crisis and also during the pandemic crisis, that we need to find ways in which we deal with issues of disproportionate experiences in the healthcare field, disproportionate experiences in access to healthcare, and so forth. We got to think about and discuss ways in which we can remind, as a reminder of who we are and whose we are. Whose we are is your family, who you come from, who you represent, the ancestors that are part of your lineage. These things becomes very important. We have to reframe how we look at things. We have to reframe our experiences in response to various challenges in the world. So while we created this to talk about the reframing of the response of sheltering in place, being quarantined, we have to reframe the way we examine what has created us, how we create and defend family, how we create not only for the few to survive, but we create for the majority to survive. We don't slip and slide to individualism. We got to stay away from that, because one of the foundations of humanity, Ubuntu, is that we are connected with others. It's not an individualized construct. So we can't be selfish. What do? We need to think about ways to Zola up, love on each other, to redefine the various survival strategies to bring safety and protection to us all. So even for my fellow man, my brothers out there who are suffering through issues of depression or suffering through other maladies, we have to reach out and remind them that we are here with you. We are connected. We have to revitalize. Very important. That is important. We take this time to hold up in high regard and deep respect the idea of family. Family is foremost. It's important. We all come from one. We are part of many. We have an opportunity to examine how our life and living as a family is centered on understanding, connectedness, and love. We have to restructure the idea of living space. This pandemic in the past year challenged us that we have to restructure the idea of living space. We have to create family games, inspire and elevate the young. We have to co-author family victorious play with everyone playing a certain role. And we have to co-create the most delicious and nutritious meal to build our immune strengthening systems, to create antiviral ingredients to add into our system. So we have to understand the values of food and how the food plays a role in mental health. When he talked about biology, not only was he talking about how the brain structure, the organic system, the nerve cells, they connect with each other, but the foods that we eat helps our brain to function. We have to eat right. We have to take natural substances that allow us to function properly. Some of us are so quick to run to the doctor to get a pill, a prescription for a pill, than to really take the time to understand that what is that medicine required to do, trying to do, and then what foods can do the same thing. Echinacea, ashwagandha, rhodiola. These are natural herbs, plants, flowers that also have the same effects as you taking Ritalin, as you taking some type of sleep medication, as you taking some other type of thing that's going to affect the biology within your brain. We need to recognize that. So we need to think about and discuss the ways as we zola up on each other that inspires us to be even better at living and doing what we do. I'm gonna be simple. Am I cutting the grass tight when I cut the grass? And when I look at my work, how do I feel about it? And then others are gonna say, man, that grass looks good. See, the affirmation comes from those who you are connected to in your community, in your family. So I can feel good about my work, but sometimes we feel good about our work, and then we feel as if nobody else recognizes our work, and so then we get depressed about what we're doing. And the fifth is to reward. Give thanks for doing good is key to enhancing the fabric of family, manhood, connected as men. We should do good because it is good to do good. Rewarding our goodness in words, songs, and deeds is the practice that acknowledges our worth and our value. So collectively, we think about and discuss ways in which we can acknowledge and reward the good that zola up, that occurs within our families, each other, and everyone you cherish. I can speak from personal experience that being diagnosed with a medical issue, and my man talked about it early on. Well, he talked about it in his last presentation about, losing your sense of sexual stamina, or losing your sense of energy, lethargy, and so forth. All those biological components due to a medical condition challenges your psychology. Well, it takes us to reframe that, reward ourselves with the ideas of what impacts have we given to other people and how they demonstrate that in return. And so in this particular piece, we talk about recognizing, seek and speak truth of ourselves to the world. We do and demand justice in our relationships, society, and the world. As men, we have to demand justice in our relationships with each other, for our society, for our communities. We have to remember and revere our elders, our ancestors. They play a major role on how we function today. Our elders play a major role of guiding us. Our ancestors play a major role of shaping us through dreams, through spiritual connections. We have to cherish and challenge our children to have demonstrate ethical and expansive conceptions of themselves. I believe the things we talk about, excellence, expectations, and so excellence and expectations, these are the things that are required that we as men, we continue to teach young men how to be. It's very hard and disheartening to hear at times that when my daughter, who's 25, tells me, what are you doing for the young men so they can what? Function properly as they relate to our women, our young women. That is our job, is to guide these young brothers in the right and fruitful way. And so I will find a way to get this to Pastor Ogletree. So that way, anybody who wants to utilize this is a workbook, it's a prescription of how we do and what we can do for ourselves. At the end of this workbook, so in personally doing things that are life-affirming activities while sheltering in place, beyond this time, we can break the chain of the Western hegemony, mean break the chain of following somebody else's cultural ideas, cultural value system that is antithetical to who we are, and finding strength from our own sense of being. We need to recognize how those things work themselves out. With that said, the idea for us is to look at personhood, how to revitalize the idea of personhood. We have to master our own thoughts and master our behavior and actions. These are prescriptions. We have to have devotion to a higher purpose, which is what we've been talking about, is that God, what has God, whatever you may call him, Obatala, Allah, Oludumare, whatever you may call him, we have a devotion to a higher purpose. We have the faith in the ability to teach you to teach the truth. Recognize that. We have to have faith in that one can use the truth. So you can't take information that claim to be truthful and then you can't utilize that truth. That means it's a false reality. We have to have freedom of resentment when punished and freedom of resentment when wrong amongst ourselves. We have to learn how to do these things within ourselves. We have the ability to tell right from wrong and the ability to tell the difference between the real and the unreal. In psychology, we recognize that when there's a break in reality, there's a break in your interpretation of what is real and what is unreal. We have to have the ability to tell the difference between the real and the unreal. So what we do know, and some of my elders, master jegnas, teachers, that you guys understand the true rules of culture that Black folks have always lived by. We always live by this sense of appropriateness. And the appropriateness is that the rule of culture, wherein behavior is governed by its purpose and is directed by notions of formality, deference, and civility. Formality, deference, and civility. And we also know that we live by this code of a sense of excellence. See, the elders know about these things. We have to live by a sense of excellence. The rule of culture, wherein behavior is governed by a synthesis between what? A personal style and character, and a desire for perfection, affirmation, and ascension. Desire for perfection. No one's saying you have to be perfect, but if you desire perfection, you functioning in what is called perfectedness. You in the mode of perfectedness, where you are trying to be the best that you can at all times. And then you affirmations and ascension. I'm trying to ascend to a higher level. I'm trying to reach the gates of heaven. These things are important things to discuss amongst ourselves as a people, amongst ourselves, more importantly, as men. And as men, how do we discuss these things with the younger population, the younger generation? I've been around in every environment I've been to, young brothers, since this is about men, are always seeking the advice and knowledge of elders, the older brothers. They're always seeking that advice. They're not afraid of us, and we cannot be afraid of them. But we have to hold each other accountable in order to hold young people accountable, because they watch everything that we do. When we begin to operate out of a sense of inappropriateness, then that's when they call us on our contradictions. For me, mental health is that outside of the severe psychological dysfunctioning, which is the organic stuff, when you have to take medication to correct it, but when the adjustment disorders come along, or you have some there's a dysthymia that lasts for a long period of time, or we just trying to relate to people, we recognize that it's always the contradictions that you demonstrate and witness in life that affects your own mental health capacity. So with that said, I like to say that we are as African as we are, and the healing that we possess exists within ourselves, but exists within ourselves from the mere fact that we have each other to rely upon, that we love each other, we Zola up on each other, and we use it as a healing capacity, to where we begin to operate, dissimulate, we begin to dismantle those stressors or those onslaughts of things that are affecting our own mental challenges, that are affecting our own identity, that challenges who we are as men in this society. In the field of psychology, what we do know is this. Sometimes we get confused by it. Research has shown that in the Black community, when it comes to children recognizing roles between men and women, then in the Black family, it's more egalitarianism. It's more egalitarian, meaning that children recognize that sometimes mom does the work of men and men does the work of mothers in the household when it comes to cleaning, cooking, sharing responsibility, dealing with children. So we need to recognize that there is two systems operating here. And we have to operate from a system that helps define us for who we are, to recognize the healthiness, healthy functioning within ourselves. And with that, if I said enough, I will yield the floor.
Thank you, Dr. Wilson. Come on, give it up